Hello everyone and welcome back again to The Cat Sews. Today I'm going to be talking about my making of the Tudor Blouse by Stitch Witch Patterns. I'm very excited to talk about this make. I think it's simple, quick and easy to do, and it looks really beautiful. So let's get started. No! Better. Okay, so I wanted to talk about my making of the Tudor Blouse. Stitch Witch Patterns has just been blowing up on Instagram lately, and it's really no surprise. They've released two absolutely gorgeous patterns. The first, I believe, was the Bathurst top, and then of course the Tudor Blouse. The Bathurst top is a high-necked blouse with a very open back and a tie in the back. It is gorgeous. It's not very much my style, but it does look really beautiful, so it got my attention. And then when Stitch Witch Patterns brought out the Tudor Blouse, I was like, yes, please, add to cart, have to make immediately. I'm super excited about this. So I did. I did want to talk to you guys a little bit about it. It's a quick and easy make, so it is very beginner friendly, but there are a couple of quirks about the pattern, as there are with any pattern really. The first thing to note is that it's only an online pattern. It is not, it will not be sent to you as a printed pattern. You get a PDF? PFD? Ugh. Again, so I'm just going to jump into this video and say that I cannot remember if it's PDF or PFD. I know that one is a file type, but the other one was actually a food delivery service that I used to use when I was a cook, and so now the two are just interchangeable in my head and I can't escape that. So I think it's a PDF file. That's what I'm going with. So you do get sent a PDF file. There are a couple of folders in there to take note of. So first of all, there is your separate sleeve pattern, important to know. That's actually really handy, I think, to have it be a bit separate. It's quick and easy to cut out, but it is quite a large piece, so it does make sense that it is separate. Then also to note, you actually have a full bust and a small bust version, and this has been a bit confusing for people. I've seen, and it was a bit confusing for me at first because I'm like, I don't consider myself as having a large bust, but I also don't think I have a super small bust, so I did go with the full bust version, and that seemed to have worked very well. As far as I'm aware, there aren't super many guidelines as to which to pick. That might have changed now. If you check out the website, there may be more information. My kind of thinking on this is if you have to do a small bust adjustment on your patterns, then you might be better off going with the small bust version of this pattern. That might be helpful. One other thing to note is that the buttonhole guides are again a separate pattern that you need to print out. This confused me initially because I basically didn't read the instructions properly or look at the filing system properly. I was just like, yep, sleeve, I need that. Which one do I pick? I don't know, we'll try a full bust version and we'll see how it goes. So I didn't take notice of the buttonhole guides, but they are there. I thought I was going insane because I was reading this pattern that said, use the buttonhole guides. And I was like, what buttonhole guides? Am I nuts? Like, no, as it turns out, I'm not completely insane. I just didn't look at things properly. So to get started, please know that you do have 3 separate patterns that you need to print out. And in each one of those will also be size A0 and letter size. If you're printing with a home printer, I believe just use the letter size. That's what I used. To be honest, because in my mind it said letter and I associate that kind of with an envelope size, so I was like, that can't be right either. I don't know what to pick. But A0 definitely wasn't correct, so I picked letter and it worked with my printer. No scaling. That's pretty easy to change once you know that you have to change it, so definitely recommend keeping on top of that, and always print out that first page just to double check that you've done everything correctly. It is always a system. It's like, nope, okay, this printer, okay, only print one-sided, do not print double-sided, no scaling. Okay, I've got all these three things correct, now I can go with it. In terms of construction, this was an absolute cinch to do. Honestly, the most difficult thing is putting the elastic through the armholes, but that's not to say that it was complicated. It just was the most complicated process of this. So I will quickly speak to buttonholes. So I didn't use the buttonhole guide. I couldn't initially find it, and then when I did find it, it was just, honestly, I couldn't be bothered using it. So all I did was I measured an inch down from the top, and from there I measured my buttonhole, and then from the base of the buttonhole I measured another inch to put the next one in. So I spaced them an inch apart. It was super easy to do, was not complicated at all. And it seemed to work really well. I think I ended up with the same amount of buttons that the original pattern had anyway. I did make a couple of other adjustments to this. Well, not adjustments. The buttonholes weren't an adjustment. That was just me being insane. So the first thing I did was I actually shortened the pattern. This was based on seeing on other people where the full pattern was hitting. It wasn't quite short enough for me. Like, it was going to go too far down past the top of my jeans, and I didn't want it to. So I just shortened it. I just took where it said to fold for the hem, I just cut that off, and then that was my new baseline. So that was quick and easy to do. Another thing you may notice is my sleeves are quite a bit shorter than they would be on somebody else. And that is mostly due to fabric restrictions. I actually made this using a fabric that my partner's mother gave me. She basically handed me her box of fabrics that she didn't really delve into very much anymore. She used to sew more than she does now, and just said, go through it and see what you want and just take it. And this was one of the pieces that I found, and I really loved it. I think it's a cotton. It's not as stiff as a quilting cotton, but it certainly has that that feel to it. I don't know. I could also probably just burn a little bit and see what it actually is, but I didn't know about doing that when I started making this, and I used every single scrap of this that I could, and then I believe I made a mask lining out of the remainder, because that was all that was left. It wasn't even enough to make a whole face mask. I really squeezed what I could out of this piece. It did turn out to be not as wide as some other pieces, so I believe the length of the piece was enough, but it wasn't enough width. So I ended up having to chop the sleeves down a little bit to make it fit, which I think looks really cute. Honestly, I'm super happy with the shorter length sleeve. You can certainly go with a longer sleeve. That isn't going to detract from it. It's how it was originally meant to be made, and I do like the long sleeves, but the short sleeves are nice too. I like them. So all in all, I had a lot of fun with this pattern. I'm going to take you through my steps of making it if you'd like to continue watching. I'm also going to link Stitch Witch Patterns, their Instagram and their website below, if you would like to go and purchase this pattern for yourself, or check out the Bathurst top, is also really lovely. I honestly can't wait to see what they have in store for us next. So keep watching and enjoy! So of course the first thing to do is to assemble your PDF pattern, which took me so long to do because I had never put one together before. But overall, I'm pretty happy that this was the first PDF pattern I ever had to put together. It didn't have that many pattern pieces, and it was actually really nice and easy to do. She had diagrams of how it should be laid out, which is super easy to follow. And I really love the star and moon matching points on this. I think it's a really, really beautiful touch. So once you've got it all assembled and ready to go, time to cut out your fabric, which of course I didn't film, and I didn't film myself overlocking anything either. So we move straight on to me attaching the facings, and of course you can see whatever I'm watching there in the background. It was Netflix. So with attaching the facings, I did actually just overlock the inner edge, because the edge that is attached to the front bodice piece, it's going to be turned inwards, trimmed down, and then top stitched. So I really wasn't too worried about it not being overlocked. Now I am implementing a bit of batch stitching here, which mostly I've done and I feel comfortable doing because I had made this pattern a couple of times. I had done a few mock-ups, so I really understood the steps. So in addition to attaching my front facings, I'm also attaching the side pieces to the back of my bodice, which is going to make it easier for me and a bit time saving, because I can just go to my sewing machine, sew all of the pieces together, and then press everything. But if you're not that confident, don't worry about it. If you're a beginner, that's totally fine. Just follow the steps. It is quite easy, and you'll become more confident with something like batch stitching the more you go on. Also, sorry about the lighting. It is super weird. I didn't realize how much it was changing. It's probably just people going back and forth in front of the lamp, but I didn't realize it until after I'd filmed. So what I'm doing at the moment is I'm creating the elastic casings for my sleeve pieces. So basically, in order to do my way of doing this, and I'm sure a lot of other people do this as well, is when it says turn up by 1/2 inch, I go through with my ruler and I mark a line 1 inch from the bottom of the sleeve, and then I turn the fabric up to meet that line. So then I have a 1/2 inch casing. I think it was a bit more than that. I think it was 5/8 of an inch. So I doubled it accordingly and turned it up. And here I'm just ironing it. I'm not going to pin it. I'm just going to iron it, and that'll make it easier for me to sew. So I've done that to the top and the bottom of both sleeves, and then I can start stitching. So once I'm at my sewing machine, I'm just going to go ahead and sew all of those seams that I just pinned together. My side panels to my back piece, the facings to the front bodice pieces, and then my elastic channels on my sleeves. With the facings, they do require a little bit of wiggling to get them seamless with the edges of the bodice piece. I'm pretty sure this is fairly standard, because facings are typically just like a tiny bit smaller than the front bodice piece, which just makes them sit a bit more nicely once they've been turned in. Something to note, particularly if you're a beginner, is to always test your stitch length to make sure the tension is correct and to make sure it's not going to make your fabric wrinkle or do anything weird. This is what fabric scraps were made for. So I always recommend, and I always do myself at the start of the project, to go through and do a couple of test lines of stitching. This will also help identify if your needle is maybe a bit too big, because I find if it has trouble going through the fabric, it's either too big or too small, and it's worth replacing it with something that's more suitable. Fabrics like satin, for example, should have a small sharp needle, whereas other denser fabrics like denim should have a heavyweight needle. So what I'm doing now is I'm just going through and I'm trimming down the seam allowance in my facings. This is just going to help them turn a bit more nicely and reduce some of the bulk. I've also gone, and where the corner is, I've just cut diagonally across. I didn't used to do this. It was pointed out to me at some point that it's actually a better way to do it. And I agree, it just helps you turn out a nicer point, and it just looks a bit better from the outside. Again, you want to reduce this seam bulk as much as you can. And once that's done, it's back to the ironing board. So I'm starting by pressing my facings to the inside of my front bodice piece. Starting with the corners, I've turned them out just to make sure they get a really nice sharp point. It's also easier to do with two hands. I do recommend taking the two edges closest to the corner and giving them a bit of a wiggle to make sure the corner turns out really nicely. And then as I'm going through and I'm pressing the facing slightly more to the inside of the bodice piece, which will basically mean that it won't be visible from the outside. I'm also taking this opportunity to press my back bodice seams because I'm also going to be putting in the facing while we're here. I do like to use my little sleeve pressing tool. I'm not entirely too sure what the name for this is. It's not a tailor's ham, I don't think. It's in a similar design and pattern, but it is used for sleeves. I actually really like using this for bodices because I find that if they don't have a sharp curve, but they do have a little bit of a flare, it just deals with the curved edges a bit better than the ironing board will. So I'm sorry to say, but I do agree with everyone when they say that you should press your seams as you go. It does give it a better finish, and it's also just easier to press your seams once you've sewn them than it is to finish the entire garment and then try and press your seams. I do also go through and I press them on the inside first and then on the outside to make sure everything is really smooth and crisp and I haven't missed anything. Once I've done that, I can attach my facings. It's important to note here that you can't attach the back facing until the back and sides have been sewn together. I am also taking this opportunity to prep the elastic for my sleeves. You can find the elastic measurements you need in the sizing charts. It'll show you how long each elastic piece for the top and bottom sleeves should be. Now that I've got everything pinned together once more, I'm just quickly sewing on the facing to the back just to finish off that raw edge. So I do know that the pattern says to understitch the facings, but I'm not a fan of understitching. I find it to be really fiddly and annoying, and I don't enjoy doing it. So here I'm just top stitching the facings on, making sure that they won't turn over to the right side. Quick note, if you are going to top stitch them though, actually work from the right side of the fabric just to make sure you don't get any weird bits of thread bunching up on the front side that everyone's going to see. Apparently this isn't a lesson that I've learnt for myself yet, but I actually like a bit of visible top stitching as a nice little decoration. I did insert the elastics into my sleeves next, but I didn't realize that I wasn't filming this with a very good view at all. I only captured the very edge of me doing this. I apologize. I will get better. I'm still learning. But I did just use the safety pin method, putting a safety pin in one end of the elastic and using it to pull the elastic through the sleeve casing. Once I got one edge done, I sewed it down and then continued to pull the elastic through. Now I'm just going through and I'm ironing down my facing and then turning it to the wrong side of the garment. Once again, turning it just over so that you can't see the facing from the outside. And then stitching it down. Nice, quick and easy. I know it's a lot of steps, but it won't take too long, I promise. And now that my facings are all attached and top stitched down, I still like that method better than understitching, though to be honest, I could have understitched the back facing. It wouldn't have been that complicated. It's a straight line, but I still don't like doing it. This will be something I might experiment with in the future. But now I can actually put the entire thing together. So I'm just attaching the front of my bodice pieces to my side bodice pieces. And now that the elastic is in my sleeve pieces, it means that I can join up the underarm seam. So other makers have mentioned, and I do kind of agree, the way the elastic is inserted does make that seam allowance a little bit bulky. Personally, it doesn't bother me. I don't find it uncomfortable, but if it is something that would bother you, you can insert that elastic so that those last 5/8 of an inch are free, which would help smooth out that seam allowance a little bit. But it's really only that lower sleeve cuff where it might be an issue. I don't believe the upper sleeve would have the same problem. Again, it might make it just a bit easier to sew in. It's personal preference, really. Do your mock-ups, I suppose, is the main thing. I recommend it generally speaking, even if it is a simpler pattern, because it does allow you to figure out if those little quirks of a pattern are going to annoy you, if it's something you want to do something about, or if, you know what, it's fine, I can deal with it. I am sewing down my side seams again here. One note that I will say is I'm working with my front bodice pieces facing upwards and I'm sewing downwards. This is just so that my dart doesn't get trapped and pulled up. So the way I've sewn it keeps the dart nice and smooth and laid down. I'm going through and yeah, I get to use my sleeve pressing tool for actual sleeves. So I've just inserted it through the middle, as you can see, and then I'm just going through and pressing that seam down. Again, I'm giving that seam allowance with the elastic a bit of an extra press just to make sure it sits nicely. So again, I told you pressing is key, pressing at every single step. I'm just going through and ironing down those front bodice or side bodice seams. I get confused as to what kind of seams they are at this point. Where the front bodice and the side bodice join, I'm ironing it down. And once I've done that, I can attach my sleeves. So I've laid out the fabric flat here, and then just as I'm going through and I'm attaching, I'm lining up the underarm sleeves. The underarm seams with the matching ones on the bodice. And what I like to do is I like to go through and just place a pin straight down the center of that underarm seam. And I like to check it just to make sure it matches up on the other side, because this can impact the way that seam fits. Ideally, if you do it correctly, once you've sewn everything together and you've pressed it, that seam should just continue on nicely into your sleeve without there being any interruptions. And then I'm just going through, I'm pinning the rest of the sleeve and lining up my edges. This does take a little bit of maneuvering because they're kind of a half circle at this point. This is definitely going to be one of the easiest sleeves that you set in. Because the sleeve is cut on the fold, there isn't actually a front or back side to it, which is normally something you do have to be careful of. You have to be aware of which is the front and which is the back when you insert sleeves. And ordinarily when you're inserting sleeves, they're a full circle, not like this, which is still, it's a weird curvy seam to try and sew, but it's still a flat seam. You don't have a whole other half of a sleeve with pins stabbing you while you try and maneuver the whole thing through the sewing machine. So this is a really, really good place to start with sleeves. And once that's done, you pretty much have your bodice. It's complete. Amazing. It's almost wearable now. My next step, all I'm doing is just hemming it. So again, like the method I used with the sleeves, I believe it said to hem it by 1.25 inches. I could be wrong. Check your instructions is my recommendation. But again, all I've done is I've just doubled it, drawn a line, and then fold it to meet the line and ironed it down. This is almost a straight seam. I have put some pins in because there are a couple of little folds that you need to make sure that the outside stays nice and flat. Another thing to mention is I'm sewing from the underside this time. This is so that as I'm going through and I'm hemming it, I can keep my seam allowances nice and flat. Nothing gets caught under the machine and gets bunched up. So all that's left to do is put in your buttons and your buttonholes. Exciting times. So as I said before, there are buttonhole guides. Please use them. Don't be like me. An easy method for measuring out your buttonholes is to measure your button, add 1/4 inch to that measurement, and then that should be how long your buttonhole is. It's long enough that you can take the button in and out, but not so long that your button just randomly falls out of place. So I've just gone through, and as I mentioned before, I measured 1 inch down from the top, then I measured how long my buttonhole is, and then from the bottom of that buttonhole, I measured another inch. I also made really clear markings for where the top and the bottom of my buttonhole should be. That just makes it a bit easier to put in. I find that it's a bit tricky to look through that buttonhole presser to determine where the start and finish of your buttonhole is. I have a 4-step buttonhole maker on my sewing machine. So hopefully you do have a buttonhole making guide on your sewing machine. If you do, just make sure that you're changing over your stitch length to be the one for making buttonholes. Otherwise, you're gonna find it a little bit difficult to use. And once that's done, you can just go through and open up the buttonholes. I was actually watching a Gertie video just the other day where she recommended placing a pin at the very end of your buttonhole before you go in with your seam ripper. Now, I've never done that before, but it sounds like a good idea because I'm always worried about accidentally ripping open the end of my buttonhole. Now all I'm doing is I've lined up the top and the bottom of my shirt pieces, roughly how far I want the buttons to go in. Again, your buttonhole guides would be very handy for this. But I'm just going through, and in the middle of those buttonholes, I've marked a little line where my button should go. And then I'm just going through and using those little markings, I'm sewing in my buttons. Now, instead of buying a standard 4-hole button, I did buy these nice shank buttons just because they had this lovely glossy, smooth surface on the top. To be honest, I was a little bit worried about using a shank button. I didn't think it would hold very well, but actually I've worn the top a couple of times and I'm not having any issues with them. So I'm pretty pleased with how it went. I did hand sew these on, mostly because, as I said, they are shank buttons, so I really don't think you can attach them with a sewing machine. My goodness, if there's an ingenious way to attach them with a sewing machine, that's crazy and someone should let me know. Did you just see Claudia dart out from the background there? Extra points for you if you did. I'm just going in with a needle and thread and putting these in, just going through a couple of times to make sure they're nice and sturdy. I honestly probably go through more times than I should because I'm worried about them just popping off. It is quite a nice bit of hand stitching that you can do in front of the TV if you're prepared. It's little things like this, you can really take your sewing with you wherever you go. You don't need a sewing machine. If you hit into it, you could totally hand stitch everything. And I definitely recommend, saving these for those evenings after dinner where you're sitting down with the rest of the family, but you still have something to do. And then once your buttons are in, that's it. You're done. Well done. You now have a wearable blouse. That's fantastic. Thank you so much for watching. I hope this was helpful and maybe a bit entertaining, but possibly not. As you can see, I moved to a bit of a different location today. Just trying things out. Obviously, this is my first couple of videos. I don't know what works best. I don't think this is as good in terms of lighting, but I believe the background might be a bit better. Honestly, I've got no clue. If you have any opinions about this, please let me know. I'd love to hear them. I'd also like to hear what you've been making recently, if you'd like to share. Have you made your own Tudor blouse or another of the Stitch Witch patterns? Or are you making something completely different? Let me know. I believe it's time to get back to my day job, so off I go. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day.